The architecture of inner isolation. Today, we're decoding a bizarre, honestly, almost universal phenomenon known as the insider-outsider. We're going to break down the deep psychology of feeling entirely alone, even when you're literally completely surrounded by your closest friends. Let's get right into it.
So, have you ever experienced this? You're sitting in a room full of people who genuinely care about you. Maybe you're all laughing, talking, sharing a meal. Yet, deep down, there's this profound, unshakable sense that you just don't quite belong. It's a totally bizarre paradox, isn't it? I mean, your logical brain knows you're physically included, but your emotional brain, it feels entirely disconnected. A lot of people mistake this for simple shyness, or maybe they just brush it off as having an off day. But as we'll see in this explainer, the psychology behind this is vastly more complex and way more fascinating than just a passing mood. Okay, let's dive into this. It feels like there's an invisible wall between you and the group, or that you're just a temporary guest in your own social circle. If that resonates with you, I want to absolutely validate that specific feeling right now. This is not a personality flaw. You aren't broken, and you aren't just being antisocial. Psychology actually shows us that this feeling of being an insider-outsider is a highly sophisticated protective mechanism. Your brain developed this a long time ago. Your mind is actually trying to stay one step ahead of potential rejection, and it's doing so by keeping you at a safe, calculated distance. To really understand why this happens, we have to talk about rejection sensitivity. Think of this as your brain's internal threat scanner, and its volume is dialed all the way up to 10. Psychology reveals that if you grew up feeling like you weren't really anyone's first choice, well, your brain adapted. It became remarkably skilled at reading the room. It learned to meticulously analyze tone of voice, slight pauses in conversation, and tiny, microscopic shifts in behavior. Why? Because your mind learned that being ignored or replaced usually comes quietly. So it stays on extremely high alert, constantly scanning for signs that you don't belong, basically trying to detect distance before anyone even admits it's there. And this brilliantly illustrates how that threat scanner works in real time. Say a friend hesitates before answering, your brain immediately predicts, oh, they found someone better, or I'm totally replaceable. This is what psychologists actually call the replaceable mindset. It's a cognitive bias, often hardwired during early childhood, especially if your emotions were ignored or maybe compared to others back then. You essentially start predicting loss before it ever happens. And because a part of you is already bracing for the ending, you prevent yourself from ever fully leaning into the connection. Now, that intense fear of loss often leads to something called survival independence. If you grew up in an environment where emotional support simply wasn't guaranteed, you likely figured out very quickly that having needs made you vulnerable. So what do? You learn to hide them. You stopped asking for help. You stayed perfectly quiet about your struggles because you were absolutely terrified of becoming a burden and losing whatever tenuous place you had in the group. But here is the massive, really heartbreaking irony of survival independence. By hiding your true self to stay easy to keep, you actually make yourself incredibly easy to overlook. You inadvertently reinforce the exact feeling of isolation you're so desperately trying to avoid. The overloaded processor. So, up to this point, we've looked at emotional history, but now let's shift gears and look at how your brain literally processes social data in real time. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that what often feels like a weakness is actually a superpower of awareness, high sensory processing. You see, some of us naturally take in a vastly higher volume of details. The microexpressions, the subtle shifts in posture, the underlying tension in a joke. Most people completely miss this data. But because you're capturing all of it, your brain's processing power gets maxed out so much faster. You become too aware of the subtle group dynamics. And when your brain gets overloaded like that, it forcefully shifts you out of the role of participant and puts you securely in the role of observer. Your social battery simply drains faster because, well, it's running so many background applications. And the sensory overload actually dictates what you enjoy in social settings. For highly intelligent and introspective minds, participating in standard social rituals and small talk feels incredibly draining. You might stay completely quiet in a group, not because you lack things to say, no, but because your brain aggressively prefers depth, meaning, and new ideas over surface-level noise. This preference makes you feel detached from the crowd, even when you're sitting dead center in the middle of it, simply because you're speaking two entirely different social languages. So the crucial point is, if you've ever wondered why you feel so exhausted after a party, it's because of high self-monitoring. Look at it this way. If 80% of your brain is busy evaluating your own tone and basically acting as your own personal PR manager, that leaves only a tiny 20% of your mental capacity to actually enjoy the event. You aren't just hyper-aware of others, you're relentlessly hyper-aware of yourself. With your attention so intensely divided, it is practically impossible to be truly present. I mean, you can't enjoy the party if you're constantly acting as your own security guard, analyzing whether you're fitting in correctly, right?
But here is the absolutely great news. We don't have to stay stuck behind that invisible wall. Understanding the architecture of your isolation is the very first step to dismantling it. First, you've got to recognize the protective pattern for what it is. It's an old operating system that you just no longer need. Second, and this is massive, you have to stop trying to earn your place. Your past experiences explain exactly why you developed these defensive patterns, but they absolutely do not define your current value or your fundamental right to belong. And third, you just have to allow yourself to be. You don't have to perform to be loved by the right people. Which brings us to our final and definitely most important question for today. Will you continue performing for your place, or will you allow yourself to just be? Once you start understanding these hidden patterns in your mind, you stop being a victim to them, and you start seeing yourself and the people around you in a completely new, empowering light. You are allowed to take up space without apologizing for it. Think about that for a while, and until next time, keep exploring the incredible architecture of your own mind.